what blew me away in reading the encyclical, two things. One is that we are doing, or we're attempting, in some cases we're actually doing great work. In other cases we're still pushing to do many of the things that were included in the encyclical. And then the second thing that blew me away about the encyclical was how science-based it was. That it wasn't just the Pope just, waving his arms and saying, well, this is something that we morally should do, which he did.
Good idea.
But in addition to that was the scientific basis for what we should be doing to address climate change and to create. And the other part, of course, was his explicit description of what he thought would make a great city, which includes access to nature, a concept that's very true in Portland. People's relationship to the landscape, to the place they live, is very strong.
Yeah.
Very, very strong here. So that's the back. That's kind of.
And that's very different from the rest of the country, right?
Pardon?
This relationship that you just spoke about with nature is very different from the rest of the country?
I don't know. No, it's interesting. I get asked frequently whether we're unique in that regard. I don't think we are. Even in New York City. I mean, New York City Parks has a fabulous natural areas program. East Bay Regional Park District that we took great inspiration from, or doing incredible things in the Bay Area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Minnesota. What makes us different than those other cities and regions is that urban growth pattern. We have compact urban form. We have a strong land use planning tradition here. So I think it's more trying to simultaneously keep a compact urban form and protect and restore nature inside the city. Trying to do those simultaneously is very difficult because obviously the higher density development you have, the tendency is to get rid of the green part.
Yeah.
So trying to integrate the green and the natural and the built environment that's the big challenge now.
While you're still trying to incorporate social cohesion, because that's another thing you very specifically mentioned. So you're now dealing with nature, with policy and decision makers, and social cohesion, and making sure equality exists. With
and
all
that it's
species.
equitable.
And it's equitable.
Yeah.
How do
That's
you
what we're trying
incorporate
to do.
that? But how do you incorporate that? How do you incorporate social behavior into natural behavior? Or is there...
Well, wait, okay, now we're talking to, there are two, well, there are multiple facets of social behavior. One facet of social behavior that we've had to work very hard on and are still working on, and will continue working on, is just the whole concept of stewardship. People have a responsibility for protecting these areas on their own property as well as on public land. So that's a huge challenge. A lot of what our work has entailed is educating the public about the fact that there is nature in the city. You know, the whole attitude towards cities from the 1960s onward, even to today, a lot of conservationists don't feel there's anything worth protecting in the city.
Because it's not natural?
Yeah. It's degraded and it's not pristine, it's not natural. And when I started my work in 1982 as urban naturalist, there were conservation organizations that were very upset with me for wasting resources on crap, on trash, habitat. It's been a big, long battle. So that's a social issue, you know, like just the conception of what cities are, and fighting the attitude that there's nothing worth saving in the cities, it's been a huge fight, and it continues to this day. There's still state and federal agencies and nonprofits, conservation groups that would argue, we should take money from stormwater ratepayers in Portland and spend it out in the hinterlands, out in the pristine areas, not in the city where they live, because there's nothing here worth protecting. So that's still an issue. So there's a second aspect of the social milieu, I guess.
Yeah.
The third one is getting to be quite sticky in that there's a emergence of people who are working on equity for underserved communities, for people of color, and their argument is that old white men, elitists like me, don't care about them. All we care about is our habitat areas. What the hell with people? Well, that's bullshit. Nonetheless, there's become an area of conflict. Like some equity advocates have argued that there are, and this is true, there are deficiencies in parks on the east side of our city and region, where most of the poor people have lived historically. I live there myself, so I know that area personally. And there are not as many parks, there are not as many services, not as many amenities, if you want to call them. I don't think of parks as an amenity. I think of parks as an essential urban service. Yes. So they've, have argued, well, why should you spend money over here on the west side of the Willamette, where the wealthy people live, to protect headwaters area in a watershed, when poor people don't have parks? Yeah. So what's the balance? That's a big conflict. Yeah. My argument is we need to do both. It's not either or. Yeah. But there's tension that has arisen over the past 3 or 4 years. Interestingly, though, in 1994, we created a group called the Coalition for a Livable Future. That the intent of which was and the reality of which is we brought together people who are working on affordable housing. We need affordable housing. There's a lot of homeless issues in Portland right now, as there are around the country. On equity of access to parks and natural areas, and worked with the Albina Ministerial Alliance, which are the black churches, Urban League, African American organization, Jobs with Justice, social environmental justice groups. Yes. We brought together them with Audubon Society, with Urban Green Spaces, with other more mainstream conservation groups, and we created a common agenda. And we work with one another. If you were a housing advocate, I would come and learn from you about affordable housing issues, and you would learn from me about park and nature issues. So we did a lot of that kind of work. Yes. Back 1994 through 2000. Okay. And actually made great progress on uniting, on building common ground to work on those issues rather than fighting. Yes. In other words, our philosophy was make the pie bigger. Don't fight over a small pie, make the pie bigger. So we all advance our agendas. And unfortunately, that's broken down. So that's a negative thing that's going on right now. Absolutely. In my opinion, in our region at any rate. It's very disappointing because we put massive amounts of resources, financial and time and energy. Yes. So that's another aspect of the social milieu. The collaborations and partnerships. What else? I would say something that I think is is pretty unique for our region.
Yes.
Throughout all of that work that we've done over the last 30 years, one of the things that I personally have put a lot of explicit attention to is building the civic infrastructure.
Okay.
Okay, so we're out there trying to get more parks, trying to protect fish and wildlife habitat, have a sustainable urban environment that's built in the natural environment. That's infrastructure. That's all infrastructure, right? Green or otherwise.
Yes.
Well, there's also the concept of civic infrastructure, and this will. Well, I'll tell the story the way I normally tell it.
Yes.
So, our former mayor, gave a talk one day to a bunch of fish and wildlife managers.
Okay.
At the Hilton Hotel,
Okay.
downtown Portland.
Yes.
And it turns out he was a duck hunter, shot ducks and canoed a lot.
Okay.
And he mentioned great blue herons a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with great blue heron.
The bird, yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful bird. Yes.
So I grabbed him on the way out of the Hilton because he had mentioned herons numerous times in his talk, and his name was Bud Clark, and I said, Bud, we should have the heron. It should be the city bird. And he agreed. So 2 weeks later, he proclaimed the great blue heron our city bird.
Yes.
That day, after city council, we went to a local brew pub, and I was sitting there having a beer with a friend who worked for the EPA.
Okay.
And the brewmaster walked by and asked how things were going up at Audubon. So I said, great. I said, we just got the city to adopt the heron as a city bird. And he said, oh, well, I just brewed an ale that I haven't named yet. Let's call it Blue Heron Ale.
Oh.
I mean, all that may sound trivial, but what happened was once we had Blue Heron Ale at Bridgeport Brew Pub, then we would start having all of our meetings at the brew pub over beer.
Oh.
So you would get elected officials, nonprofits, agency people all together over beer and talk about this cause, this agenda of integrating nature into the city. Well, during those years, I mean many years, people got to know one another. You got to know one another on a very personal level, not just, oh, you're an elected official and I'm a NGO.
Yes.
No, I got to know you personally. And so if you ask me to do something, I would do it. And conversely, if I ask you to do something, they wouldn't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out if I had what my agenda was. They knew exactly what my agenda was, and I knew theirs.
Yes.
That's what I call building social capital.
Yes.
Social capital.
Absolutely.
Social capital / civic infrastructure. That effort, which I don't think many people appreciate, actually, how intentional it was. That effort created an environment, created enough social capital that we were able to, I think, greatly accelerate our work here. Things happened much more rapidly than in a system that people really didn't know one another that well. They didn't necessarily trust one another. It would have taken many, many more years to accomplish what we've accomplished in the region, I think.
Okay.
And I think that is also, I think it's pretty unique.
Absolutely.
To our region. And that's partially, New York City is so huge. I'm not sure how much of that social cohesion or social capital there is. I mean, it's there, obviously, but I think it's more dispersed.
Yeah.
Here, we're small enough, both in population and area and geography. And this has its pluses and minuses. It's a small city, really. Everybody knows one another.
Yes.
So that's a good thing, or it could be a bad thing. If you screw up, it's a bad thing. Because people know, and they don't forget.
Yes.
So I think that's worked in our favor, too.
That's amazing.